you know, on the surface, you know, having this sort of nebulous risk, kind of similar to climate change, where people don't really understand it, they don't get it. You know, people are like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. We should definitely put regulatory bodies together. You know, let's get Kamala Harris to like regulate AI. You know, who better? So anyway,
that's exactly the sentence that I was thinking.
Yeah.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to AI Unchained. I am Guy Swan, and this is the show about self-hosted, sovereign, open-sourced AI tools and philosophy. If you are sick of having to plug into the Microsoft and Google centralized databases and closed platforms with no privacy or security in order to get your AI tools, well, then you came to the right place, because this is how you avoid that. Today, we have another awesome conversation with Alek Svetski. This is the follow-up to episode 2 that we did with him, and he has announced the Spirit of Satoshi, this project that he has been working on, and the company and the many people behind it. And we dig into all sorts of things, the complexities of training a model like this, and the difficulties of curating and finding information, and how to think about the stack between the language model itself and its sources of data, and how it makes sense between fact and just, you know, that hallucination effect of just creating something nonsensical that doesn't actually exist. And also how Bitcoin, how a digital bearer instrument and irreversible payment system factor in to, are increasingly going to become a critical part of how we actually have a sustainable open source AI ecosystem. And we are going to get into all of it in just a minute. This show is brought to you by CoinKite and the Cold Card hardware wallet. The beauty of Bitcoin is that it has made corporate and government level security that used to cost tens of thousands of dollars in hardware security modules literally easily accessible, simple to use, and incredibly affordable. Like, just consumer grade affordable. You can get a level of security that was unheard of 10, 15 years ago in a digital hardware device. If you have your Bitcoin, if you have purchased Bitcoin and you have it on an exchange, you need to withdraw it now. You need to get yourself a cold card, and luckily you can get 9% off with code BITCOINAUDIBLE. That's my other podcast. But that code will still get all of the AI Unchained listeners 9% off their cold card. So check it out. Go to coldcard.com. I have the link in the promo right in the show notes. So check it out if you haven't. Now let's take a quick moment before we get into it to like and subscribe this channel so that you don't miss all of the amazing things that we are doing. And also, for those who don't know, we do have read episodes on the podcast that are only on the audio feed right now. So don't forget to check out the podcast version of this show on the RSS feed. And just a moment of silence for everyone who is taking the moment to subscribe. All right, that's good. Let's get into the conversation with Alek Svetski. This is AI Svetski, welcome back to AI Unchained. This will be episode 5. You're already the first person to come back on the show. The most. We're on episode 5 and you've been here twice.
Did that say something about you, or did that say something about you not having any guests that would come on? I'm kidding.
You are Svetski is 40% of this show. Oh God. Dude, welcome. I'm not totally awake yet. I'm getting there.
It's all right.
Oh man. So welcome back to the show, man. This was something I was really eager. I kept wanting to ask you about this last time you were on the show. But you have an announcement to make. You announced something in Prague and a project that you're working on, and that you want everyone to be a part of, even, and it's really exciting, and I'm happy to get into it. So how about I hand this over to you? You kind of give me the breakdown that you gave in Prague for revealing this to the world.
Sure, let's do it. Thank you, sir. So yeah, I went to Prague, and it was kind of impromptu. We sort of were only half ready to make an announcement. That's why on my little Twitter thing I called it a light announcement, whatever the fuck that is. We live in the age of announcements, right? We're announcing an announcement. This is um, so we. I my talk at Prague was basically, it was a short 10-minute talk on. I mean, it was entitled Bitcoin Meets AI, which is sort of where I ended the talk. But really, the talk sort of centered around the theme of differentiating fake risks from real risks in AI. And we touched on this in the first episode, right? Kind of this idea of, where AGI is around the corner and AI is going to kill all of us, so we need to align AI. And in order to align AI, we need to build these regulatory bodies to regulate language models, because that's the one that's most likely to become super intelligent, right? And on the surface, having this sort of nebulous risk, kind of similar to climate change, where people don't really understand it, they don't get it. People are like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. We should definitely put regulatory bodies together. Let's get Kamala Harris to like regulate AI. Who better? So anyway,
That's exactly the sentence that I was thinking.
yeah. So like, maybe her and Yuval Harari and Klaus and a couple of friends, right? That's like the perfect AI policing committee. Because they've done such a good job in the past, right? So anyway, people are very quick to sort of say, "Oh,
intelligent and moral."
Yes, both. It's the ultimate overlap, the Venn diagram. So anyway, my whole thesis on the stage was like, look, AGI is so out there. Like we can't even define, and we spoke about this last time also. We can't even define like elements of cognitive intelligence, let alone like the innumerable array of intelligences that make up the thing that we know as generally intelligent, which is humans. Like, we have emotional intelligence, we have hormonal intelligence, muscular intelligence, like biochemical intelligence, we have intelligence in our guts, in our organs, like fucking everything. Like we have no idea. Like, we're still sort of in the realm of cognitive intelligence, like computation and language and all this sort of stuff. Like all the other stuff is like so much broader. So anyway, my whole thing is like, look, I don't say this because AGI is impossible. Who knows? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but we're so far from like, even like broad intelligence, let alone general intelligence, let alone consciousness, which is what I think most people are actually afraid of when it comes to AI. I think most people are actually afraid of like, a conscious sentient machine kind of killing everyone, right? And having its own will, basically, right? That's really where I think a lot of the fear mongering.
They're worried about something that looks a lot like a human that's just more capable than them.
Correct. Exactly.
Like it has human emotions, it has human things, or it's the opposite of that. It's the definition of a psychopath inside of a computer.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And
So,
there's actually something interesting that you bring up about like the fact that intelligence is. I've read something not too long ago. I feel like it might have even been posted in that AI group. It might have been in that article, but just talking about how like nature itself actually maintains a staggering amount of intelligence at all times. Like the intelligence and the balance just within like things that are constantly interacting and within like a forest or something, and like a fungal growth, like the amount of data that it's actually processing and responding to, and the stimulus that will change its behavior. But we don't think of these things like it's like AI, especially large language models, are literally just like a tiny little thin layer on top of this, of kind of an extension or a new branch of cognitive intelligence, simply because it's linguistic, like it's language based. But the idea that it's consciousness or that intelligence is some crazy, weird, bizarre thing that only we invented, it's to completely misunderstand the nature of nature. Is that no, this is all nature has done, is create intelligence and order and sustainability. And I love that, because it's one of those heuristics that I fall back on all the time too, is that in the face of something that I don't understand, look at what happens in nature. You know, like how, like, order maintains,
Mm-hmm.
and things that destroy usually die.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
you know, at the end of the day, and I think this was an analogy you used actually, or it was something. It was something in variance with it, because Timcast actually had a good analogy too. I hated the rest of his show was so stupid on AI recently, but the analogy that he used was, it's like the discovery of fire, and in that same sense is that it is something that can get away from us if we don't know what we're doing with it. You know, if you don't know how to use the tool, you can easily start a fire in the woods and be like, oh, look, I'm going to cook my food, and then you accidentally burn the forest down. You know, and in that same way, these things can carry their own threads and do damage that we don't intend for them to do, because it is a process that we start. But the idea that we should be afraid of it, and that it's going to take over the world and destroy everything, I just don't. I don't see nature producing that. I don't see that as the consequence of intelligence. I see that as kind of our ignorance and
Yeah. Yeah.
basic fears of, you know, personified computers.
Do you know what it really
It's
is?
Hollywood.
I've called it like a nerd's nihilistic wet dream, right? Like it's you know, the idea that, you know, seriously, like nerds
A
don't believe,
nihilistic
you know,
wet dream. It really kind of is, though. It's a
it
great way.
really is. Like it's this kind of thing. It's like, oh, you know, the Bible's fake, religion's fake, and all that sort of stuff. But then on the other side, they sort of, like, every human being has like an eschatological sort of, you know, piece in their brain. So for them, the eschatology is like, you know, God is in the computers, and God's going to burn everything down because we created Him, and you know, it's kind of like this doomsday thing. You know, it's like everything, and it's kind of it's an inner
Yeah.
projection, right? Like it's almost like an inner anger that they have with the world that they can't sort of, uh, you know, they almost like are so bitter that there's nothing sacred, that they don't believe in anything sacred, that they almost like imbue circuits with something sacred. It's this weird fucking thing, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, like I just don't like. There's a whole other discussion about like if there was a being somehow that emerged that was of a higher intelligence. My guess is that such a being would be more cooperative than antagonistic. Honestly,
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, it's not just about like burning everything around you down. Like that's artificial stupidity. It's not artificial intelligence. But that's a whole other discussion, which, you know, maybe we'll save for a future episode. You know, when we want to turn your, you know, maybe we'll do episode 6 and make this show 50% Svetsky. I'm kidding. um, but I think what I want to sort of say here is that in this fake risk of AGI being around the corner because language models, right? It actually does. I think that narrative is first, it's either naive, so it's like naive and stupid. So it's kind of like, oh, climate change. We need to, you know, turn off all the power plants tomorrow because we're going to burn the world down, right? So that kind of naivete,
Mm-hmm.
which is really stupid. Or alternatively, it's more the it's also like the deliberate red herring kind of hysteria narrative by those who want to create
Yeah.
regulatory models, right? So they know, like, I would argue that a lot of it's the same kind of people that are pushing climate change, same fucking people pushing AI regulatory stuff. So usually
Yeah, the
there's a
same
good,
people who want to make you, if you're afraid of climate change, then it's really easy to create a shitcoin token called carbon credits that's $2 trillion worth of new derivatives in a financial system that's running out of things to trade, like running out of derivative runway. And then if you're afraid of AGI, it's a really great way to make sure that you can silo these things into a few giant corporations that are highly watched and controlled by the government. And then you have a Facebook, a centralized Facebook and platform sort of dynamic, which you clearly don't have in AI right now. You can recreate it. You know, fear is the
yeah,
ultimate tool of control.
yeah, yeah. So this is where my sort of argument boiled down. Is I was like, look, this fake risk is either naivete or an actual attempt to create hysteria so that the real risk comes in. And the real risk is exactly what you said, is approved language models. And I kind of had a slide in there, and I called called them the language police. And I kind of had like Yuval Harari, Altman, Weth, and all that sort of stuff, which is essentially what they're putting together. They're talking about language models must be approved. They must be run through toxicity filters. They must be run through safety filters, responsibility filters, et cetera, in order to be approved for use within certain domains, et cetera. So this is sort of what I flagged, and kind of what my talk boiled down to at the end is like, don't get fucking caught up in the AGI hysteria. Sure, that might one day happen, but for damn sure we are not anywhere near it. When you hear AI regulation, that is actually the risk. And what we should be doing is pushing back against not only the narrative, but also going out and doing our best to build models, alternatives, et cetera, that basically make it. I mean, we're playing whack-a-mole again, literally. Yeah. Like Bitcoin is playing whack-a-mole with the financial system, which is fundamentally the backbone of everything. And Bitcoin is whack-a-mole because you turn one node off and there's another 100,000 running. You're fucked. So Bitcoin is sort of one. So now we've got to kind of same sort of playbook. We've got to build many models, many data sets, many applications. We've got to kind of work into making this a tool or a series of tools, a toolkit that many people use in many ways. That that is too hard to have a master switch for, so that way we don't end up in a I guess, like, as with any tool, like if I'm the only person with a gun, I run the show. If I'm the only person who gets to call what's happening with language models and AI sort of development, then I run the show. It doesn't have to be AGI for me to have a significant advantage over you. It just needs to be.
Imagine having the internet versus not, and you're the only one that can has access to all the information on the internet. Yeah. AI is not a whole lot unlike that.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the theory and the thesis behind my talk. And I guess, I don't know if you want to dig into any of that, but after that, then I kind of announced our little initiative as an example of doing something about it.
So let's talk about the initiative. Let's go ahead and get into that.
So yeah, we've kind of, I guess, made everyone a little bit wet now. So now let's just the tip. Yeah, the initiative is a Bitcoin-centric language model. And there's been sort of murmurings here and there of people talking about doing something about this. And as I think I explained on the last call, for the last 6 and a bit months now, geez, it's even been a little bit longer, I've sort of been down this AI rabbit hole. And really what we were doing was initially we were trying to fine tune, and then later we went on to kind of building embeddings and creating these knowledge graphs to build personas, right? And the original personas we wanted to put those in like a mentoring app. And those personas included people like Jordan Peterson, Marcus Aurelius, Steve Jobs, blah, blah, blah. And as we were sort of, going down that rabbit hole, like, it's a cool concept, but what I felt we were doing was almost building a solution in search of a problem, right? Like, it felt cool to sort of have a Jordan Peterson AI in my pocket, but I was like, what do I ask the guy? Like, hey man, what'd you have for breakfast? Yeah. It kind of like, it's a little bit, I don't know, it's a bit gimmicky, I guess.
Yeah.
And
outside of the way he speaks specifically, like, what is it necessarily, like, what generally am I asking that I definitely only need Jordan Peterson to answer? You know what I mean?
Exactly. So, and look, maybe there is something there at some stage, maybe, but I guess what was triggering me, or at least I remember just waking up one morning. It was kind of like a burst of inspiration. I woke up one morning and I was like, holy fuck, I figured it out. I was like, there's going to be 1 billion people in the next 10 years asking, why Bitcoin? What is Bitcoin? How does it work? Blah blah blah. Like, tell me one other industry on the planet or one other thing on the planet that necessitates a rabbit hole like Bitcoin. Nothing. Like the amount of content, like the amount of shit that's written on Bitcoin, Bitcoin and mushrooms, Bitcoin and sex, Bitcoin and vaginas, Bitcoin and fucking energy, Bitcoin and Austrian, like everything. There's some Bitcoin apparently just touches everything, and not only that is like we in the Bitcoin space know that we're on something which is the ultimate contrarian bet. It's like Bitcoin is, intellectually, philosophically, economically, like it's central. And the more that sort of dawned, the more I realized, man, we need to like build, like not only do we need to build something that essentially encapsulates all of this incredible Bitcoin content and the stuff that sits at the periphery of Bitcoin, so Austrian economics, libertarian literature, and stuff like that. But we also need to do it in such a way that it becomes an onboarding or educational tool that can be used at scale, right? And the analogy I like to give to people is it's very effective to orange pill someone one-on-one, right? Like if I sit down with you and we have a conversation, I can understand a little bit about you. I can figure out what your hotspots are, and I can present Bitcoin through a lens that you're familiar with and that you will understand and that you might be more conducive to, right? That's very effective, but it's not super efficient. Like I can't fucking do that with 7 people, right? Neither can you. So now, Bitcoin kind of has this strength that each one of us becomes almost a node in Bitcoin, and we go and convince our friends and we, fucking nag them into buying some Bitcoin and do all that sort of stuff. But once again, it's not super scalable. So what's more efficient? Well, what's more efficient is doing things like podcasts, writing essays, writing articles. But that's not as good. That's not as effective as orange pilling someone directly, right? For me, a language model represents an opportunity to orange pill both. So let me rephrase it. It represents an opportunity to blend efficiency and efficacy, right? Like a language model could technically tailor its communication to you, not just in your language, but understanding a little bit about you and tailoring it to something you already understand, and taking you down the Bitcoin rabbit hole in a way that is good for Guy, or good for Svetski, or good for Paloma, or good for Jack, like whatever, right? And I think that's where the power of these language models sort of lies, at least when using it as a tool. And this is sort of what I want to stress is the big epiphany that I had was that, look, AI is not the product. AI is actually the tool. The product in this case is Bitcoin education, or the product in this case is, maybe I should say, alternative education, because we'll want to broaden it beyond just Bitcoin. Like, and the cool thing about Bitcoin obviously is like once you start understanding Bitcoin, then you start thinking about sound health, sound money, sound like localism, like all of the stuff that comes with it, right? So we could literally build an entire corpus of knowledge accessible through an open source language model that becomes the the place where people go to learn something other than the mainstream, and go down these rabbit holes and learn and evolve and become more as a human being. And anyway, that's sort of the premise of the idea. So I'll stop there for a moment if you've got any questions.
Yeah, one of the things I've been trying to think about, like, what these things are. Again, it's one of those things like Bitcoin is, even after you're in it for years, like you're still stopping sometimes and you're trying to think like, what the hell is this thing again? Because you realize some new element of it or a new aspect, and AI is so interesting because we do have this kind of like silly tendency to personify it, and that's not what it is. But it's interesting to think about it from the context of these like skill or information repositories, yes. like this, like some sort of hyper compression of this certain way of thinking, or this certain, it's it's almost poetic that we're creating this at a time where we're losing so many skills and we're
Yes.
losing so much knowledge in the actual economy. Because, there's probably a few, 70-year-old guys out there that are just so good at like something in machining or welding or something like that. And they have some knowledge that may literally get lost because our economy is so out of balance and misallocated that there's nobody for them to teach. There's nobody for them to train. And these are, I mean, not to say that like we're going to have a large language model that's going to be able to pass on their welding skills, but the knowledge and the information that you pick up from those situations as you begin to integrate these things and you learn how to utilize these tools for that sort of thing. Like a great example actually is when I was internet technician. Like you can get a lot of book knowledge and a lot of information about like internet problems and how signals work and all that shit, but it's just not the same as plugging in your meter and being able to see what it looks like on the grid when you're putting out the thing and you can see it move in one way and you're like, oh shit, that's this kind of noise, like I think we got like a bad fitting somewhere. And like that really can't, like, so much is gotten from experience. So much is gotten from like boots on the ground, like running into a problem that you just have no idea. You have no basis for understanding, and you fight with it for 4 hours until you figure out it's every time somebody turns on their freaking microwave, it's their Wi-Fi goes out because their Faraday sucks or something, like their microwave just busted. And but those specific sorts of things are only the things that transmit through shadowing, through like being with someone else and training them as you go through those problems, and then you tell them that funny story about how the microwave was screwing up the Wi-Fi that one time. And this is actually a way to, it's a new layer of the ability to actually start to codify that, to actually be able to carry that on in the face of still losing that person with the exact experience. And it's so interesting. It's like it's such a hopeful and crazy empowering thing when you think about it like that. The new layer of intelligence or experience that you can now save on a computer with these new tools. And I don't know, what's your kind of long term thinking on this? Like, are you generally hopeful? Like, is this something? Because we did just have like the dark side of AI episode. So, like, what's your? Is it all optimism? Is it a little bit of pessimism? Like, what's your take on kind of the general direction before we get into some specifics on Satoshi,
Yeah.
Spirit
So,
of Satoshi?
I mean, even to what you just mentioned, it's a double-edged sword, right? So like, technology's technology is an interesting thing. As people who are predominantly sort of libertarian, will always say that technology is a tool, right? And it's agnostic. It's how you use the tool that matters. But I think there is, for the good that technology does, there's also a cost, right? And so, sort of the cost in my mind is always the Wall-E cost, right? It's the I'm referencing the movie, right, Wall-E, where everyone has become
Yeah.
so dependent on the screen and everything around them that they just become fat blobs, right? And I think that's probably generally the cost of technology. It kind of maybe shifts us more into the material realm in some way, and I think it what while I agree in some sense what you said about like preserving knowledge, and I mean it's definitely what I'm trying to do with this Bitcoin language model is preserve the memes, preserve the knowledge, preserve like the nuance, preserve all of that sort of stuff in some way that is accessible through language, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
someone said this the other day, and I kind of agree with them. It's like a language model is a glorified search engine, right? And it's
Yeah.
essentially what it
Yeah.
is, really, right? Um, and I think that is right to some degree, but it also the cost of that is like let me just explain it through this example. It's when I was young, I used to do door-to-door sales before we had any GPS on our phones, and you could
Mm-hmm.
drop in the middle of a fucking suburb that I've never been to with a little copy, a photocopy of a little map, I could find my way. You could drop me in the middle of nowhere, and I would just know. And I knew every street in basically an entire city, like because I had door knocked it before, and like you had to find your way around. We didn't have we didn't have iPhones, we didn't have any of that sort of stuff. These days, I mean, you take a kid, you drop them in the middle of somewhere. Good luck, bro. They'll starve to death in a city, right? That's how ridiculous things have gotten. Now, does that mean that GPS is bad? No, not necessarily. But there has been a cost to like, yes, we can find our way quicker now, but you know, we don't even look at the street signs anymore. You know what I mean? We don't remember where we're walking, right? Like my wife's a great example. Like, you know, we go for a walk through Europe. Like I still have that skill, I guess, because I was, you know, doing that when I was younger. But I track and think about the streets. I kind of know my bearings, and I don't have to look at the phone all the time to figure out where
you have different habits. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So like, you know, for example, we'll walk out of the house. I'll look where we're going, and then I'll just walk the whole way there. Kind of like know directionally where we're going. She's like, "How the hell do you know where you're going all the time?" And I'm like, you know, I don't know. It's like a sixth sense, right? Whereas her, God help us, like she'll get lost going around the corner, right? So, so this is sort of where I think, you know, there is a price to pay. There is a price to pay for becoming more technologically adept, and I think the onus is on us as individuals to spend some time detached from technology in some way, to maintain our own skills, right? Like I used to do this actually when I was in high school. Everyone was always dependent on the calculator during math. And I grew up to a really strong Eastern European father who he hated calculators. He never let me use a calculator. Man, the kind of arithmetic I could do in my head back in the day, I went all the way through to 12th grade without using a calculator. I fucking hated them. I had this like repulsion to calculators for some reason. And I actually did one of my exams without a calculator, and I got like 86%. Like I fucking mopped the floor basically, you know, half the class without using a calculator. So, you know, I had that. These days, I'm a dumb shit. You know, all I do now is use calculators when I need to, you know, figure out 6 plus 7. I'm like, what was that again?
Yeah.
Was it 18?
It's 18. It's 18. It's 18, dude.
So anyway, I think I've sort of beaten that long enough. So yeah, I don't know if there's a clean answer to that. I don't know if there's is it good or is it bad, or is it just it is, and it's kind of the Faustian bargain that we
just is, yeah,
sort of, you know, sign up for.
Yeah.
But I think we can probably consciously try and do things at an individual level that, you know, make us masters of this technology instead of the technology mastering us, sort of thing. So I think that's like a really important point. And then I think there is genuine use cases where you know, leveraging the technology makes a lot of sense. And, you know, I guess in this case, as a, you know, quote unquote Bitcoin repository, as a Bitcoin educational system, as a tool for onboarding, you know, like a bespoke orange pilling at scale, something like that. I think there's something here that, you know, the world needs. And I don't know if it becomes a character in and of itself. That'd be really cool, and that's kind of where we want to take it. So, yeah, that's my not so clean cut answer to your question.
It's funny. I thought about it. It's one of those things that you think about, especially like I was always like big into film and stories, but in the kind of like cheap, the stupid time travel stories, it's always like people from the future go back in time, and it's like they have superpowers or whatever because they have this grand knowledge that everybody from back then doesn't have. And it's so funny as I think about it now. Like when I was a kid, I would love this. Like, oh, this is so cool. And what's funny is I think about it literally the opposite now. That if anybody from our time went back 2,000 years, it would literally be like everybody else had superpowers, and that person is completely incapacitated. They can't walk down the street. They don't know how to make themselves a sandwich. Like it just there's nothing. They don't no access to the internet or the tools. It's like, oh yeah, I'll do that. I'll watch that on YouTube. Oh shit, I'm so fucked.
survival 7 days max. Actually, that's how the web plans to depopulate us. Just send people back in time.
Just, oh
How long
god.
they last.
So I want to talk about one of the things actually you said is the scale, and that's a topic and an idea about AI that has been fascinating to me. Is that if these language models, or let's say Spirit of Satoshi specifically, ever become like a really great, if it's a great Bitcoin tutor, even if it's a great introductory tutor, for some period of time, the scale of having everyone who can have a one-on-one introductory tutor to specifically answer their questions is fascinating.
Yeah.
Is fascinating, and even in a subpar state, it's so incredibly useful to kind of get things moving, or to just have some basic resource. But what in your, like, I don't know the training models or the training mechanisms, I guess. And I haven't really gone that far into the LLM space yet. But what are the big challenges? What happens not quite like you thought it would? Like, where are the complications in this? Because a lot of this is just kind of like a magic box for a bunch of people. Is that like, oh, you put a bunch of information in and then it knows stuff. And that hasn't seemed to be the case. I've explored a lot of different LLMs, and it's amazing how many errors and just kind of like making things up, because it is a probability machine. So
Yes.
what's the magic sauce? How do you tweak? I'm very curious about some of the dynamics in training and making it correct, so to speak.
Yeah, let's dig into that. So we we got a lot of experience trying to do like the Jordan Peterson models and all of that. And my whole thing was, our pitch was, we're trying to build models that not only emulate the linguistic style but the model of the world of particular personas, right? And we never quite nailed it, because we were always trying to fine tune or retrieval enhance GPT-3 basically, or Da Vinci, something like that, right? Which are the OpenAI models for those who don't know. And I'll explain what retrieval enhancement and fine tuning means in a second. But the model of the world is a very tricky one, and I don't actually think that that's been cracked. Is like to have something represent not just the style, language style, but a real uh,
A
what's like
perspective,
like a perspective, like an opinion,
a
exactly.
worldview, yeah,
Yeah, exactly, a
yeah.
worldview.
A
Um,
reasoning model, so to
yes,
speak.
correct. I'm not sure if that's been cracked yet. Maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. But at least from what I can tell, the larger the language model, the more general it is, the less of a worldview, the less of a particular worldview it has, because it's got such a broader corpus of probability clustering to sort of source from. It generally sort of, I guess it represents almost like you know the the lukewarm middle, or the mean, or the average, or the median in some way. Now, you can prompt your way into getting it to sort of represent a little bit more of a model of the world, but you have this sort of issue with the mainstream language models, particularly, I guess, ChatGPT and Google's Bard are probably the two big ones that everyone generally refers to and talks to, which are probably the best general language models. They work the best. They can follow instructions better and all that sort of stuff. But they have been guardrailed essentially, so that when there is opinions or worldviews that you want to elicit that don't fit within the prescribed guardrails, they basically look like a Roomba vacuum cleaner. It's like error, error, and they've done all this sort of apologetic crap, sort of, it apologizes before, apologizes after, and all this sort of shit. So anyway, to kind of deal with that, there's a couple things you can do, um, and maybe what I'll do is I'll explain sort of like the three ways to train a model, quote unquote, and this will sort of give us the context to think through this at a larger sort of scale. So
Mm-hmm.
you have pre-training, you have fine tuning, and then you have, I guess, reinforcement learning. Some people say that's a separate stage, and some people say that that's part of the fine tuning stage because you're changing weights and biases and all that sort of shit. But let's say you've got fine tuning, pre-training, fine tuning, and reinforcement learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like the three stages of a training of a model, and then you have a second part, which is kind of like you can call it a post-training, but it's not really training the model. It's connecting the model to a vectorized knowledge graph, and I'll explain what that means in a second. But let's talk through the first three ways. So, pre-training is when you basically take a massive corpus of text, and you structure it in a particular way, so it's like raw and it's in chunks, and you feed it to a model. You select the model architecture type, so GPT is probably the most common now, which is generative pre-trained transformer architecture, right? And what this machine learning model then does is it plays a game internally of guessing the next word or guessing the masked word in sentence. Mm-hmm. And it just runs that over and over and over and over and over again through layers and all this sort of stuff until it gets relatively good internally at guessing the next word or guessing the masked word, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then you basically what you're doing at this stage is you're creating probability clusters around particular words and sentences and stuff like that, right? So you're creating, you're turning all of the words and the sentences into vectors that represent some sort of semantic meaning. So that way, cat and dog, for example, are relatively close together mm-hmm. from a semantic standpoint, because they appear in sentences relatively often, like cat, dog, pet, all that sort of stuff will appear. So, whereas the spelling is completely different. Cat and mat, the spelling is almost the same. So if you had like a strict traditional database, those two would come close together. But when they're embedded and vectorized, cat and mat are different places. Dog and cat are in close places. So that's sort of step one. Step two, then fine tuning is where you're going in, and there's many methods of fine tuning, but sort of the most popular that people are aware of is the QA fine tuning. So you create a question and a desired response, and you get the language model to run it, and then you give it an example, and depending on the semantic distance between the answers, that information goes back into the model, and it changes the weights and the biases. So basically the amount of weight it gives to particular probabilities of words, and how much emphasis, that's the bias piece, that it gives to particular words and sentences and stuff like that. And you're adjusting so that way the model will probabilistically output closer to what your desired response is in the fine-tuning mm-hmm. phase, right? And that adjusts, as I said, the internal weights and biases. And then lastly, and this is sort of where the human stage comes in, is you're doing like a reinforcement learning. So basically what you do here is you give people access to, and this is what we want to do with the Bitcoin community, basically, is you'll get the model to answer a question in two ways. And somebody will look at the question and the two answers, and they'll say, this answer is better. Or they'll rate the different answers. And then that is, you can see it's almost like fine tuning. That's why people sort of place, the two together sometimes, but it's more of it's a human version, as opposed to just like feeding it to the model and doing unsupervised. This is sort of supervised fine tuning, I guess, is where the reinforcement learning sits. And people just manually just say, okay, this is a better answer, this is a better answer, this is a better answer, and you sort of feed that back into the model. And there's some other complexities here which I won't get into, but there's like reward models that you can build that sort of sit next to the reinforcement learning, that basically when the model guesses right, it basically gives it a reward, right? So when it's closer to where the reinforcement is supposed to be heading. So that's sort of that final stage. And what they found is that human reinforcement learning is way more accurate than the unsupervised fine tuning. So that kind of like is the cherry at the top. And that's what makes the model really good. And that's where it's kind of like almost like, giving a kid a slap on the wrist when it says something wrong. So it's like if the model is a little bit out there, it's like, if it says that there's only two genders, it's like, no, there's many genders, and you must remember that. So it's like, oh shit, the model gets a spank, and then it remembers in the future not to sort of say that. So there's sort of like the three methods, and you can sort of maybe tell by maybe even the first method of training, the pre-training, is the big problem we have with a Bitcoin language model is that all the like if I was to go and take the mainstream information on Bitcoin, what do you got? You've got fucking CoinDesk. You've got like, all this crap, right? And basically what you're doing is you're training the model to semantically understand Bitcoin and Ethereum as the same thing, or Bitcoin and Doge as the same thing.
Yeah.
That's
if
why,
you do like a normal Google search or like a basic search engine, it's so crazy. I don't think about it because I'm so like, that's my network, right? So I don't have to worry. I don't think about the filters that I've set up for years and years on what good information is. But it's so crazy. If I just go like search buy Bitcoin or what is Bitcoin or something on like a search engine, it's nothing but like garbage.
Yes.
For like the first 4 or 5 pages, it's all advertisements. It's Coinbase. It's just shit. And like, I just feel so bad. I'm just like, the people coming into this space, no wonder they're buying Cardano and Ripple first. It's just crazy.
So therein lies the problem with a Bitcoin-based language model. So you can go and take ChatGPT, for example. You can ask it to act like a Bitcoin maximalist, and it'll maintain character for a little while. But as soon as you ask it, pretend you're the most hardcore Bitcoin maximalist possible, blah, 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 blah. And then, you ask it about like, investing in Bitcoin, and it'll tell you to have a diversified portfolio with Ethereum and Bitcoin so that you're right. So that kind of crap is always going to come out. So for us, what we decided was like, man, we got to go back to the pre-training stage. Like, we've got to take a model and actually have these probability clusters different, and then fine tune it, and then do the reinforcement learning. Kind of go through the whole thing. And go ahead.
So I wanted to get this right. So you've built a model from scratch?
Not yet. No. That's the next stage.
Not yet. Okay.
Stage,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe before I even talk about that, actually, let me talk about what we did now. So we've come to this realization after trying to do what I mentioned earlier about embeddings, right? So you've got the pre-training, fine-tuning, and the reinforcement learning. You can go and take any model now, and you can go and fine-tune it, and do some sort of like, feed it a bunch of question answers and try and change the weights and biases and all that sort of stuff. And you can do that. Like, the most common one that people do that with is probably still DaVinci, OpenAI's thing, because they've just got an easy toolkit, easy way to do it. But even then, you haven't solved the underlying problem. So then what people go and do, and you see this a lot when people say, oh, I've got my own model, right? Or our business has built our own model around our, Q&A, our FAQs, right? Or I built, a model of the Bible, right? This is essentially what they're doing, is they're not retraining the model. That's a fucking lie. Very, 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 very few people are doing, the retraining of the model. What they're doing is they're taking a corpus of knowledge. So let's just say you wanted to do let's just use the Jordan Peterson example. And we did this, right? Is you go and take all of his text. So his 12 Rules for Life, Beyond 12 Rules. You can go and transcribe his podcasts and all this stuff. And you go and take his like maps of meaning. And you break all of that content into semantic chunks. Or in other words, just paragraphs of something, right? That if you as a human, like the rule of thumb is, if you as a human read the paragraph, you'd kind of understand what the paragraph is talking about. So there's enough context there. You break it into chunks, and then you store each chunk as an individual vector. So you basically take some sort of embedding algorithm and you embed them into a vector database. And there's many vector databases out there. You've got more cloud-based ones like Pinecone. You've got local ones like Chroma, etc. You do that, and then when you want to interact with the language model, you create like a front end for the language model where you kind of give it an abstracted prompt. You say, okay, you are a language model that is going to emulate the linguistic style and thinking and opinion of Jordan Peterson. And whenever you get a question, you are going to take the most relevant piece of context, which is the most relevant vector store, the most relevant context from what's been taken from all the books, and you're going to put that into like you're going to add that into the prompt. So what we did essentially was when someone asks a question of Jordan Peterson, we take the question, we have our pre-prompt, we then go and find the most relevant piece of paragraph, and we put that into the prompt, and then we feed all of that to ChatGPT or to GPT-3 or to our fine-tuned DaVinci, whichever one. And then when it responds, it takes that bit of context into account, and it produces an answer that is more relevant, right?
Interesting.
So this is when people talk about having their own local models and all this sort of. This is essentially what they're doing, and it's not really training the model. It's not really what you're doing at this stage. Training a model is a whole fine-tuning process, or it's a pre-training process. It's much more expensive. It's much more technical. This doing embeddings is really the gold standard. So whenever you see these, create your own chatbot, read your PDFs, right? Or, turn your PDF into an AI chatbot. Like all of these sort of tools, they're all embedding tools. And look, it is useful-ish. But once again, so we built our first model. We basically took every Bitcoin book. We took all of Seyfedin's blogs, Gigi's blogs, Breedlove, mine, fucking Bitcoin Time stuff, Bitcoin Magazine, all that stuff. And we built a massive library of vectors, probably the biggest Bitcoin vector database out there, actually. We did that over a couple months, and then we fine-tuned DaVinci, and we plugged it all in. So the alpha that people I've given some people access, like I sent it to you earlier, actually uses that style of response. And it's not bad. Like we went through and we basically plugged a bunch of questions that might be a little bit tricky. So it's like we created all these pathways. If a question about shitcoins is asked, we then add a weighting to go and query from these chunks, and the shit from my article in there, why Bitcoin or shitcoin, all this sort of stuff, and it'll actually give a better response, right? But it's still not perfect. You can prompt your way into turning Satoshi into a shitcoiner at the moment. And that's where my whole epiphany came in. I was like, fuck, we need to do this. We need to go back to the start. We need to build a model from scratch. We need to fine-tune it ourselves. We need reinforcement learning. We need to do a reinforcement learning stage with the whole Bitcoin community. And then we can still use our vector store, to make things a little bit more relevant, a little bit more sharper at the end. But that last bit is not really training. So that's kind of what we've embarked on now. That's, we raised a little bit of money for it. We've got some good sort of Bitcoin backers and Bitcoin VCs doing this. We're going to throw a bunch of bounties up to get the community to sort of be involved in the data curation process and in the training process, and also in the evaluation process. So we'll talk about those in a minute. But anyway, that's kind of stage one was to do that thing and prove that, hey, there's something we can do here. But the low cost method doesn't really work. The higher cost method, doing something from scratch, I think is imperative, and I think it's a Bitcoin utility that the world needs. And yeah, we've sort of embarked on building that, and it's I think it's going to be a fun project.
So the way I understand embeddings for the large language models, which this seems like it's kind of the exact same thing with the image diffusion stuff, actually, is that you have this broad model, and when you give it an embedding or a set of embeddings, you're basically telling it to narrow down. You're saying, please stay near this in your vector connections and in the connections that you make. But because it's still a general model, and because it responds to the conversation, you can still have it travel back to basically a general set. You can talk its way back. You can talk it back to broad conversation. Whereas the alternative, actually having your own model, is to literally train it only on semantically Bitcoin vectors, sort of in a way, is that the whole language itself is actually built around everything that we talk about in Bitcoin. Like, what is Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin content, and the Bitcoin viewpoint, and the Bitcoin worldview, how, so you say that's the more expensive method, obviously. Embeddings seem incredibly cheap and quick. Really clever way to get a quick result.
Yes.
But what is the degree of cost? What's the degree of time? What's the degree of, like, how many people do you need in this to train this, to kind of stair step this thing towards a really, really incredible tool, do you think?
This is a work in progress.
Mm-hmm.
Estimations are a couple $100,000 for a model of our size.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it looks like. And I think a lot of it's, there's a big chunk of cost as well in like curating the data and making sure that that's all good. And this is where we're going to want to
Mm-hmm.
like really leverage the Bitcoin communities. If people have like, if anyone's listening to this and they've been sort of like gathering Bitcoin data and doing all that sort of stuff, like fucking hit me up. Let me know. Like, we're open sourcing everything. So we're just trying to like collect it all so that we can do the training. And like, we're going to be paying for the fucking training out of our pocket and then making, the whole model free for everyone. So like, if anyone wants to sort of participate in adding data to that, by all means, like reach out to me. Like, I would love to get some, Twitter data. Like if someone is really good at like scraping Twitter, for example, and getting us like some really hardcore, really good Bitcoin Twitter data from like some of the best Bitcoin tweeters out there, that would be amazing. But anything like that, like, yeah, like we've got this. We're going to chuck it up on GitHub, but we've got this internal document that we've been using to kind of like categorize like what are the areas of it. So we've got like Bitcoin and energy, Bitcoin astroeconomics, Bitcoin and Bitcoin biology, Bitcoin and this, Bitcoin and that, like all this sort of stuff. And we're trying to like, you know, gather up corpus of data across all of these things. We're also going to add like, all of the stuff on Mises.org, everything we can find on Austrian economics, everything we can find on libertarian literature, everything that we can find on even like classical English literature, because you want to have the models still be broader than just Bitcoin stuff anyway. So
Sure, sure.
and Bitcoin sort of builds on all of these things anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we like if anyone can sort of help with that stage, like this is the kind of we're going to put like probably a Discord or Telegram group or something together, like to sort of help corral all of this stuff. But there's a cost in the training, but there's also a cost in sort of the data curation, data collection, data structuring, formatting, and everything, so that it's ready for the model to do all the probability ingestion, the masking, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. How do you deal with this? Is something that I've found with like Hugging Face released one as like an interface for their website, and I've seen this like with 2 or 3 different ones now actually, and they're trying to make it so that like it's a way that you can kind of like navigate things, but when you ask it questions, it hallucinates.
Mm-hmm.
Like because it's just a probability machine, it just invents things that don't exist. Like it told me, like I asked if it was like, what's a good model for translation of text to speech to a different language, and it was like, oh, this model by the XP Griffin model by so and so, and it gave me a link. None of it existed. Like it was all just like fantasy. How do you? What's the process of plugging that in? Because I know a lot of services or a lot of models or whatever it is that have actually is that an embedding? Like okay, well here's the actual list of things that you're asking about. Like what's the best way to get it to understand rather than predict what the episode might be or what the model might be that in question that somebody's searching for? How do we get it to call that information from the actual list of models or things to give you the answer, so to speak?
Yeah, this is when knowledge graphs come in, right? And knowledge graphs are
Mm-hmm.
basically embedding databases. Like you can, I mean, there's multiple kind of knowledge graphs you can have. You can have like knowledge graphs that are traditional SQL databases, right? And it can call something very specific from there, right? You can have, API libraries that, that can be called upon. But mainly machine learning models work best with language models work best with semantic databases. So with these vector stores. And yeah, you can vectorize all of this stuff and you can call it. And if what you're querying has what's called a cosine similarity, so if it's like there's enough similarity between the two, that will be the selected piece of context that gets fed into the response.
Interesting. Okay.
That piece of context is referenced in the response, right? So it's almost like you're talking on ChatGPT and you say, "Hey, ChatGPT, I want you to write a paragraph on this idea, and here is an example paragraph to use, and can you write it in a similar tone?" And ChatGPT will then take what's in that paragraph and it'll like rewrite it for you, right? That's essentially what you're doing with embeddings, but you're doing that programmatically.
So you said it works really well with semantic databases. Does this literally mean that's interesting? So does the language model literally understand the database better if you speak in normal human language because that's its kind of like semantic relationships?
Yeah, pretty much. So like each vector.
That's so weird.
Each vector, each paragraph that you vectorized has, like, I think it's something like, when you use OpenAI's embedding toolkit, for example, it's like 1,598 dimensions or something like that, whatever the fuck that means. So that means like each sentence, like it's got a number basically. A vector is a number, and that means something. And then when you ask a question, hold on.
That is loud in my ears.
God damn it. Sorry. That's what a way to kill the podcast.
I'm not even cutting it out.
Leave it. So what you're doing is you're asking the model a question and it's kind of referencing. It's like, okay, what about this question matches something in there, and it just inserts it into the prompt. And then it answers with something relevant, or references something relevant.
That's interesting. It's so crazy. It's so funny because like computers operate with ones and zeros, right? And there's always this thing is like when you're doing something, whenever you're doing something, you're clicking on anything, like think about the fact that like the computer doesn't understand what you're doing. It understands pixels and it understands zeros and ones and processes and calculations. But what's so weird about this is that you're literally teaching the computer to think in language. So that now zeros and ones are hard. now math and...
Not really. Because now...
Not really? Okay.
No, we've just...
Well, it's the software layer that's...
We've just turned language into zeros and ones. That's what we've done. So
okay.
Vectorizing is turning a sentence. So the machine doesn't know what it actually means. It just,
Sure.
And what we're really relying on...
I mean, it's just like icons and stuff, is that, like, you'll still have, like, this association and this interaction with it, but obviously under the hood, it's fundamentally only zeros and ones. It's the only thing it can do. But it really is. It's a new interface. It's just a completely new interface. It's just fascinating.
That's the thing. It's a new interface, which, like, and this is where people get, often like sort of off the rails. It's like it really is zeros and ones, and I mean the big Achilles heel here is that we are really dependent on a lot of these embedding algorithms creating meaning around paragraphs that are actually accurate, because it might interpret the meaning of X paragraph and Y paragraph as very close, but maybe they're not. Now we are with embeddings, particularly with paragraph typed embeddings, we're actually a little bit lucky because English and language, and English as a language in particular, has certain rules. So for the embeddings to be useful, you can't really do a bunch of woke shit. So like, because as soon as you start doing woke stuff and undermining the meaning of actual language, you actually destroy the usefulness of embeddings, of embedding algorithms. So, generally embedding algorithms are pretty good, pretty robust. And you can like put good stuff in the embedding stuff. So I don't think that's a huge enough risk. But at the end of the day, all you're doing is you're taking something, you're taking text, you're taking the meaning of a text, and you're translating it into some numbers, and then you're looking for a match between numbers that the computer understands, and then you're producing something of more relevance or coherence out the other end.
How big of a thing is this going to be? Like how excited are you that you took this on versus how much are you like, shit, what have I done to myself?
Dude, do you know what? I got punked by building the first model, basically, when we did all the embeddings and all the fine tuning and all that sort of stuff. Like, we maybe spent like 50 grand doing that. And I was like, yeah, this is not too bad. It's all right. Maybe we can do this for like, under $1 million and do something really good. Now that I'm looking at like all the data we have to collect and like how much is really involved in pre-training and all this sort of shit, I'm like, maybe I was on drugs. Maybe I took a crack before I decided to do this. So, I don't know. We're really going to need the community's help, honestly. And this is where, maybe I'll touch on this before we wrap up, because I'm going to have to wrap up in like the next 7 minutes. But I'll touch on how I want the community to help.
I was going to give you what's the call to action here? Like, what do we do?
So here's what we need to do. We need to collect data, as I said earlier. And so anyone who has like data sets, Twitter data sets, Austrian economics, libertarianism, fucking whatever, reach out. Let's collect all this sort of stuff so that we can clean it and prep it for pre-training. Second, we'll do the unsupervised fine tuning. So we'll sort of take care of that. Then there's two other bits. There is the reinforcement learning, and then there's evaluation. So evaluation is not really part of the training process. Evaluation is kind of figuring out whether, hey, the model that we're building, is it actually fucking better, or is it like, are we just lying to ourselves, right? So the way you do evaluation is you take a benchmark model, so let's say GPT-4, and you take our model, and you ask them both the same question, and they give you the two different responses, and then a human selects which response is better without knowing who gave what response, right? So what we're in the process of doing is we're building out a database of questions. It'll be about 1,000 questions. And we're going to give people some sats for this, for the people who help us out on this. Is basically that there'll be a section on Spirit of Satoshi where you can go and you can say, earn some sats for helping evaluate Satoshi, and then earn some sats for helping train Satoshi, right? So in the evaluation part, we'll go in there, and they'll just basically, it'll be like a game. They'll see the question, 2 answers, and they'll just select which one's better, right? Or we might do like a rating system, click the stars. And what this will help us understand is, benchmarked against GPT-4, for example, how much better is our model on this specific database of Bitcoin questions. So to build that database of questions, we've got about 200 at the moment. We might even crowdsource some of that. So if people have like cool questions and stuff like that to ask, we might actually pop that up on GitHub, and people can put a bunch of questions in there and help us basically build like the ultimate Bitcoin benchmarking set of evaluation questions, right? And then we'll want to benchmark this against...
Build an LLM test.
Exactly. It's a testing mechanism. So we'll want to benchmark Spirit of Satoshi against ChatGPT, against Bard, against Falcon, against all these other ones, and sort of prove that, hey, our model's getting better as we continually do the pre-training and fine-tuning. Like, we want to make sure our model's getting better. And then finally, with the reinforcement learning stage, and this is something we're still trying to figure out how we do this in the best way to make sure that we don't get fucking noise and shitcoiners and stuff like that in there. Yeah. Basically, we'll give people, similar to the evaluation, but this time it'll be our model offering 2 answers. So there'll be a question, 2 answers, and people have the option of like creating a recommended response. So it's like, okay, yeah, this answer sucks. Or this answer is better, but this is why it's better, right? So we'll be able to have some other interaction that the average Bitcoin pleb can put in there and say, hey, this is a better answer about why Bitcoin is better than Ethereum, or this is a better answer about why it's not a smart idea to diversify your Bitcoin portfolio with other shitcoins or whatever it is, right? So they'll have a recommended response. And normally what you would do is you would feed that new recommended response back into the system, and then, play with the weights and biases. The problem of doing that straight up, though, is that, we might get DOSed, right? Or maybe not DOSed, but we might get spammed essentially by people going in there and getting crap in. So what I'm thinking the way to solve this is maybe creating it in such a way that it's like, okay, responses go in there and people can actually vote with sats to knock the best responses up a list. Then the best response gets fed back into the system, and those sats get actually released to the person who wrote the response. So that way we almost create an incentive for people to
that's interesting.
Yeah, so I'm kind of like trying to architect this in my head at the moment. And if anyone's got any ideas on this, by all means reach out. Like, this is a call to sort of get the Bitcoin community involved. But we want to create a really interesting way to incentivize people to get involved in that reinforcement learning stage, to get in there and because you get the Pareto rule, right? Like 10% of people are going to do 90% of the work, and I want to incentivize those 10% of people to just go in there and really give some fucking awesome answers and really help us do this supervised fine tuning at the end. Like, make it.
It's going to be my side gig now.
Fuck yeah, dude! Seriously, this is seriously a way for people to I want to make it a way for them to earn some sats and participate in something meaningful. And at the other end, everyone benefits, and it's almost like it'll be like a faucet, like back in the old days, right? But doing something kind of useful. So anyway, that's kind of like the three pillars. We're going to need help with data. We want people to get involved in the evaluation, and then also in the reinforcement learning stage. And it's probably going to be in that order as well. Like right now, we're just gathering data. We want at least 10 billion tokens, and we're about at the couple billion mark. So we definitely and we then going to need some help with the evaluation stuff, and then finally the reinforcement.
Hell yeah. A quick question: how do you deal with video and audio content? Are y'all able to
transcribe it, basically? So everything that gets fed to a model has to be text. So we have to transcribe everything. So
can I help with transcriptions? Because I have been setting up a script on my computer to it's Whisper AI. It's just the open AI model. But to transcribe
absolutely. So
the podcast, the show, this show.
Paul Latoy from Stackwork.
Yeah, I actually think we're gonna have a show.
Okay, yeah, perfect.
Together, yeah.
Yeah. So Paul and I have been discussing this for a while. So he's been doing transcriptions, but high quality transcriptions, where he uses using a chain of different models. So he uses Whisper to do the first run, and then he uses some specific models that are good with with pronouns, with names and spaces and places and all this sort of stuff to go through and do a second.
Okay, interesting.
Sometimes Whisper might confuse Svetski with jet ski. You know what I mean? Or whatever. So it'll have the wrong word. So he does it clean. He takes it through multiple stages to get the best possible transcription at the other end. And he's done a bunch of Bitcoin content, so he's going to be contributing a bunch of content as well to the model here. But yeah, anyone who's been doing this sort of stuff in any way, who has some sort of Bitcoin corpus of data, who's really good at scraping, who's into data science, wants to see Bitcoin sort of or a Bitcoin model grow, hit me up, please. This is the time now for us to build this shit, because I think the world needs it. So, but yeah, if you've got some stuff and you think it's pretty good from a transcription standpoint, please, man, whatever we get, the more data, the better.
Hell yeah, man, dude, this is exciting. I'm going to be send me any links that you want to direct anyone to, for trying to help out where to send information, Discord, whatever you got. And also, it'll be a great resource for me so that I make sure I'm connected to everything, because I would love to be a part of this far more deeply. That'd be exciting.
Absolutely, yeah. You are one of my main dudes. So there's that.
Main man.
for people that are interested in listening, it's just spiritofsatoshi.ai. So that's where they can go. And at the moment, it's just a landing page. What we're doing is we're letting people in in chunks to play around with the alpha, and the alpha does have a thumbs up, thumbs down. And that way at least we're basically collecting that at the moment. But yeah, like anyone who's got their name on the mailing list, they will be part of the people we reach out to for the evaluation side of things and everything. I almost feel like I prematurely announced it because like we're kind of like scrambling now to try and get everything ready so that we can communicate with people better. I have about like 500 fucking emails from people saying, "Hey, I want to be a beta tester. Hey, I want to help," and I haven't responded to anyone because I'm on a freaking honeymoon anniversary trip. So it's like I'm an idiot for doing it at the wrong time. But anyway, if anyone's listening to this and they have emailed, apologies. I will get back to you first, second week of July. We're trying to get back to everyone. But yeah, we're almost there.
Good luck with that. Good luck with tackling those messages. And you guys have fun. I guess the sun just went down over there.
Yeah, just about, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna start my day.
All right. Good seeing you, buddy. Really appreciate this conversation as always. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's always fun, and we will definitely be talking again in the future.
All right, my friend.
All right, man.
Thank you. Adios.
Later. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. There is undoubtedly going to be really exciting things to share, and we'll stay up on checking out the progress on training and the evolution of this and many other tools like it as this show goes forward and as the AI ecosystem unravels, because there's just constant updates. If nobody has checked it out, I just heard today about Stable XL. It is a completely new version of Stable Diffusion, a reworking of the model, and it looks phenomenal. So definitely check that out if you haven't. I'll have the link there just because that's the thing I've been digging into for the last couple of days. Don't forget to check out Svetski and what they are doing. I will have the link down in the description so it is easy to find. And of course, our lovely sponsor, Cold Card, and the hardware wallet to keep your Bitcoin safe, to make sure that you own it. 9% off with code BitcoinAudible. And that is also right down there in the description of the show. So convenient. With that, I will catch you guys on the next episode of AI Unchained. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll talk to you later.